In this video, you're going to learn how to set up TypeORM on our existing Node.js project. TypeORM is an ORM, or simply ORM, that supports many platforms including Node.js, and it supports almost all the major relational database types, including MySQL, Postgres, SQL Server, and pretty much everything. Alright, so let's get started. If you are not familiar with ORMs, ORM is Object Relational Mapper. Basically, it helps developers to map all the entities in the database to the code base. This can help by simplifying complicated queries, security, and especially portability, which means you can simply change the database types to something else later in the development process without having to change the already written queries. Makes sense, right? Alright, so let's add TypeORM to our existing Node.js project. Alright, so here I have a simple Node.js project written with TypeScript, and currently it doesn't have any ORMs or isn't connected to any database either. So first of all, let's open up the terminal and install TypeORM. So you can find the steps in the TypeORM documentation. As you can see, in the installation process, we have to install few packages. Alright, as the first package, let's install TypeORM. Alright, TypeORM package is installed. Let's see the documentation and install the next dependency, which is reflect metadata. I'm going to install that too. That is also installed. What's next? Well, next it says that we need to import this reflect metadata package in our main script file, which is app.ts or index.ts. We will do that later, and let's install the next dependency, which is types node that defines the types. Alright, so next let's install the database driver. So in this case, I'm going to use MySQL database, so I'm going to install MySQL driver. Alright, so that is also installed. Next, what we have to do is we need to update these two lines in our TypeScript configuration file. So here in our tsconfig file, let's add these two lines. Hit save. Alright, so now we have all the dependencies installed and all the configuration is also complete. Now according to documentation, we have to run this command so that it will initialize our TypeORM project, and automatically it will create all the files and folder structure and configurations as well. Well, in this case, since we have an existing project, I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to do the same process manually. Alright, let's open up the project, and first I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to name that entities. So this works like the models folder in our other projects. So here I'm going to create our first model. Well, I have an existing database to demonstrate this tutorial. So the database name is Selkie, and we have a table called event. So there are two records here. So I'm going to use this table in this database to demonstrate this whole process. Alright, inside the entities folder, I'm going to create a model. Model name is event.ts. I'm going to create a new class here. Name of the class is event, and we have like 4 columns here in this table. ID, and it is a string, and next the name, it is also an string. Oops, we don't want to put commas here because this is a class. And the next column is description, and the last one, location. It is also an string. Right, we just want a simple demonstration here, so this simple model will work just fine. So now we need to add annotations to mark this as an entity. So I'm going to add our entity annotation like this. First we need to import it to our project, to our class. I'm going to import just like this. So TypeORM will treat this class as an entity. So next we need to add more annotations to our columns as well. For the ID column, since it is a primary key and also it is auto generated, we have an annotation for that called primary column, primary auto generated column. And let's import that here. Alright, so for the other columns we just need our column annotation. Let's import that as well. Alright, so we are done with our first module. Now TypeORM will treat this as an entity. Next you need to create a data source file. So that's where you define all the database configurations for your project. In TypeORM documentation there is a separate section for that, creating a new data source. So I'm just going to copy this entire piece of code and let's create a new file first. I'm going to name that data source. You can create this file anywhere in your project, you just need to import it correctly. So I'm creating this inside our source folder, so I'm going to paste that here. Since we have the entity called event, I just need to rename this onto event, and I'm going to import this. Just like this. And here let's change these configurations according to our project. For the database type, I'm going to use MySQL, and the host is same as localhost, and for the port, this is the Postgres SQL port, default port. I'm going to change that to 3306, which is MySQL default port. And for the username, I'm going to keep the root, because our MySQL default user name is also root, And also for the password, I'm going to keep it blank because default MySQL user password is blank in my local configuration. And for the database, database name is Selkie. Well, this is a older database I used for some other project, so don't worry about it. And for the entity, we need to put this entity as an array here. So if you define more entities, you just need to add all the entities here. Alright, so I'll keep the other two values as it is, and then it has initialized the data source. Well, I'm not going to do that here. I'm just going to cut this, and I'm going to initialize this data source in my index file, which is the main script. So I'm going to export this, export default AppDataSource, so that this can be accessed anywhere in our project. Alright, hit save, and in my index file, I'm going to import my data source here. Import AppDataSource, and I'm just going to paste the code I copied here. Basically what it has done is it has called this function called initialize, and if it is successful, if the database connection is successful, it will call this callback function, and if it is not, it will throw an error, so that you can call this callback function as the fallback. So if it is successful, let's add a console log. Console log. Let's say the DB connection is and if it is not, so let's just keep this as it is for now for the unsuccessful connections. Let's run our project. Make sure your MySQL server is running. So my MySQL server is running, so I'm going to run our project npm run dev, and let's see what happens. And we get our application is running console log, but we haven't right, we get the second console log, which is database connection is successful. It took a while since my local computer is a little bit slow. Alright, so database connection is successful. Now we can continue development on our project. Well, I'm going to create a new controller, and let's run some queries on this as well. So inside the source folder, I'm going to create a new folder called controllers. So inside this, let's create a new controller for events. Event controller. Alright, so here I'm going to create a new function. Export let's say the function name is get events. Let's make it an async function so that we can use our await syntax. By the way, if you are not familiar with these callbacks, promises and everything, I have a separate tutorial for that. You can refer it. I have attached in the description down below. And for the arguments, for the parameters, let's say request and response. So I'm just simply create a new constant, and I'm gonna name that event repository. So by creating a new repository, we can run queries very easily. So then the AppDataSource class, we have a function called getRepository, and here we need to pass our entity name, which is event. We need to import that here. Just like this. So we created our repository. Then let's create another constant. Let's name that events, and let's use this await syntax, and let's use our repo, and using that we simply call find function. So it will get all the events in our event entity related to our events table. Alright, now we can simply return this as a JSON. For the status code, let's put 200 as a JSON. Let's set the JSON body as events, Alright, so our controller method is complete. To access this method, we need to create a route as well. Okay, inside the source folder, let's create a new file called routes, and inside the routes, let's import Express, and let's import our controller method we just created. Alright, now let's create our router, const router, it is a get route, and the method name is get events, and let's export this as well. Alright, our router file is complete. Let's close this and let's import it to our index file. In the index file, let's add our route here, app.use, let's add a little prefix here as well, API, let's say v1. Alright, then we need to import our routes, import routes from, where is our route file? Alright, so now we can access our controller method using this route. Let's try it. I think our server is updated because we have earlier installed NodeMon. In the browser, let's type localhost, and it is running on port number 3100. So the port should be 3100. API /v1/events. Yes, we get a JSON response. If you look closely, we have two records, which is all the records in the database, in the table. Alright, so our query is successful. I think now we can run any query on this and manipulate the data in our database. Alright, so that's how you can integrate TypeORM to your existing Node.js project written with TypeScript. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed the video. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys very soon in the next video.